Hello, hello, hello. Today is Thursday. It's 5:30. It's March 19th, and welcome to Let's Talk Power Live. I'm Dr. Tanji, and I'm excited to spend the next 30 to 35, maybe even a little bit longer with you. I want to start out always by asking what you're grateful for. And I want to share what I'm grateful for. I had the opportunity to go to New York for the day to to enjoy a church service, believe it or not. And I stood in line. I don't normally stand in line for church, but it was such an exciting event that I was really joyful. I took the train. I love taking the train in New York City. We had a great night, and it was a lot of fun. So I am grateful for the opportunity to spend time in the city. I was tempted to go to a play, but I didn't. So that's what I'm grateful for. I'm also grateful that it's staying lighter longer. It happened seem earlier this year, but I'm grateful for it. The sun's out. It's bright outside. What are you grateful for? Always take time to be grateful. Always take time to name the items that bring you joy because it always makes space for more. So let's talk Power Live. This is where we talk about power in education in real and operational ways. Power is real. It's real in education, and it is even more real on the instructional side. So we're going to talk about that today, but I always want to talk about something really important and what power is. I say it every week. I talk about this definition of power and what it means. So as I do every week, I'm going to give you this definition of power, and then I'm going to give you my definition of instructional power. So here is the definition of power. It is, oh, wait, let me go back one. There it is. It is the instrument of democratic designs, and it is no less the instrument of power, the control of information, the shaping of understanding, and the influence of judgment and critical elements common to democratic design, power, and power theory, and educational philosophy. That definition matters because we can look at power as a capital P, meaning overarching power, which is what that definition comes from. And then we can look at lowercase p as the individual's power. And that's really important to think about. And as we consider this idea of how power moves in society and how power moves in education, right now, given all of the dynamic ways our society is moving, we have a front row seat to how power can disenfranchise and how protecting power really does create a society where fractions, divisions, and the ways in which people look at each other can really be a challenge. And so here's the definition for instructional power. Understanding instructional power. Instructional power can be understood as an educator's use of their state, district, and building ascribed job-related authority to afford or constrain a student's access to learning. That's it in a nutshell. The question is, what does that look like when we're doing it? Those are the actions that we take as an educator. And for me, if you've been following me along, you know that for me, an educator is at any level, state, district, building, classroom. If you are a person whose job it is gives you authority over what a student learns, how they get to their learning environment, when they eat, how they eat, and the school space, you are exercising instructional power. And here's why I say that. Parents send their kids to school for two main reasons: learn stuff and learn how to do stuff. It's pretty much it in a nutshell. And so that's really something I want you to think about when you are looking at this idea of instructional power. And before I go any further, have you subscribed yet? Have you hit the like button? Have you shared this? I want to ask you to please go ahead and subscribe to this channel. Please hit the like button. We are about 10 people away from reaching our goal. We have a fantastic goal. We've been working really hard, sharing information, bringing people on board. And because it's live, people are like, oh my gosh, it's live. We don't tape it. We don't tape it because we want it to be dynamic. And so would love to have you join us. If you are a subscriber, thank you. Really appreciate your support. And thank you for being here. But for my folks who are on the fence about it, let's go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Tonight's conversation is really about something that we rarely talk about. Last week, if you were here last week and you caught some of the replays, I had my friend and colleague Melissa Lambert on, and we talked about multilingual learners. And we discussed how being a multilingual learner, being able to speak multiple languages is a superpower. And how when our students who are multilingual learners really get a grasp of the structure of language, the structure of American English, they begin to outperform their monolingual counterparts. That's some startling data. I wanted to take that conversation a little bit further this week because as we dig deeper and go further into this assessment season, and if you're not there yet, you're going to get there. One of the questions I very rarely hear educators, those who lead buildings, those who lead districts, those who lead classrooms, the question I very rarely hear them ask is, when we're measuring students, are we measuring what they know, or are we measuring how they say things? And this is particularly important when it comes to open response or constructed response items on assessments, because a lot of times when a student is writing something, they're not writing it in what has become to be called academic English. They're writing it, they may be writing it in their home language, particularly if the way we're teaching literacy, we're not doing that explicit instruction around academic English. Now, when I'm a woman of a certain age, I'm going to go ahead and say it. I'm a woman of a certain age. And when I was in school, we were specifically taught grammar. And I brought that instruction with me into the classroom, and I taught explicit grammar. It served my students very well the later they went on into school. But for some, the way I taught it, and I can admit, if you read my book, I fall on the knife. I read my book, Understanding Instructional Power. I read it a lot, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you did those things to those kids. I wish I could apologize to them. But if you've read the book, you know that I am very clear about my disenfranchising ways. One of the ways I disenfranchised my students was in this, I had a correctionist framework, right? I used correction a lot, right? I would correct kids on how they said things, make them say things over. But that came out of my own way of understanding how to support them. But I want to give us a little backstory because I'm going to invite some friends in for a little while, and you'll see what I mean in a minute. But when we talk about language and we talk about this idea of American English, this idea of American English is that it is some kind of high standard, right? We speak American English, we speak standard American English, and we are now morphed the way we say it, and we call it academic English. But historically, I want to ask you a question. Would it surprise you to know that when the American form of English was developed, it was developed as a common person's English? John Adams, one of the founders of the country, decided that our form of English should be something that was common to everyone. He wanted it to be a marker of American society, not necessarily a marker of one's status in society, not one of your geographic location or your academics. So it really was the common person's English. And for a lot of time, a long time, it was seen as a colonial outcast. Our form of English was seen as a colonial outcast. And so I say all that to say that number one, we have come a long way in the way we think about English. And so I want us to really consider some important data as we kind of map last week into this week. And we're looking at it through the lens of multilingual learners. And I want to say something. We're all multilingual learners. Now, when I'm with my friends, I speak a lot of different forms of English. But I also grew up in a household where speaking what was quote unquote deemed correct English back then was something my dad was adamant about. And so I want to bring this idea up and share with you something that's really important to consider. We have about 5 million multilingual learners in US schools today. About 1 in 5 school-age children speak a non-English language at home. But here's the piece of this. Not all of them are identified as multilingual learners. And then our high-stakes assessments are written at the American dialect. Imagine that. Now, here's something I want you to also consider. If you are a person who, like me, I will speak African American English. I will mix it with what was considered academic English. I speak multiple forms of English. We all do. But if you are the student who speaks a dialect of English that is devalued, the way you speak it, and then when you're taking assessments, it maps onto the assessment, they're misreading how a child might understand something. And that's something I want to really dig into this evening. And I'm going to bring some friends up. I'm going to show you my friends. These are my friends. I'm going to bring up Geneva Smitherman, Dr. Geneva Smitherman, Dr. Arnitha Ball, and I'm going to bring up Dr. Julie Washington. These three scholars are foundational, instrumental into how we deeply understand African American English and different forms of dialect. And I'm going to leave them up here for a little bit and kind of walk us through this. So I hope you're sticking with me. And again, remember, please hit the subscribe button. Please like and share this with someone else. Now, Dr. Smitherman was one of the first scholars who helped us understand that African American vernacular English is a rule-governed, system-bound form of speech. It has rules, and we understand it that way. And it's really important for us to consider that African American English came out of something very particular. The enslaved Africans were stripped of their tribal home languages. We know that instinctively, right? And we know that theoretically, and we know it in practice. But the genius is that they really had to come up with a way of surviving. So they survived by speaking a dialectical form of the American English. Now, Dr. Ball came alongside, sort of in between Dr. Smitherman and Dr. Washington. And there are others, but these are the three I wanted to focus on tonight. Dr. Ball really helped us understand how language differences show up in classrooms. She led the charge and the work of analyzing that the way in which students participate, how meaning is made, and how discourse is shaped is always a value-based prospect. And the value is coming from the adult, the person in charge, quote unquote, of the learning. And that's really important to think about, right? When there is a dominant culture and there is a subordinated culture, a culture whose language is devalued, there's always a gap between how they speak and what they say and how it's valued. They may be saying the right thing or quote unquote the correct answer, but if they say it in the wrong way or what is deemed the wrong way, they will be seen as having a learning difference, which brings me to Dr. Julie Washington. Dr. Washington, her work really helped us understand how this dialect is showing up in assessments. Now, many states have constructed responses. And if students are not being taught how to write in the way that is being assessed on their upcoming tests, if they're using their home language and their home language is a dialect that is devalued and they're not using academic English, they will suffer on their state tests. One of Julie Washington's critical pieces of data, pieces of research, she found that students who speak sort of more, whose dialect or higher use of African American vernacular English, if they use high forms from a volume perspective and how they speak it, if they speak that, then they're going to have more challenges when it comes to doing two things. When it comes to acquiring reading skills and then transferring that on the writing. And what she also found was that the misunderstanding of a student's use of dialect is then being seen as having a learning difficulty. Imagine that. Your form of English is being seen as a learning difficulty or a learning disability. And so the question becomes, who gets to determine the value of English? Well, in our society, we know who does that, right? We understand who is in charge of that. We get the sense that there is a certain group who really is in charge of language value, which is interesting because, as I said earlier, when John Adams was bringing about our form of English, he really wanted it to be something that was common to everyone. But as society has morphed, our form of English, which, by the way, is a dialect, the American form of English is its own dialect. We do not speak the Queen's English. So if you tell someone speak the Queen's English, you're actually incorrect. So let's agree to not say that anymore, because we don't speak the Queen's English here in the United States. We speak our dialect of English in the United States. And so I want us to think through, what does it look like when we are really having this conversation? And what can we do during this time when assessment season is upon us and the way students are speaking continues to be devalued? We have choices. Are we going to adopt a correctionist framework, one in where every time a child speaks, we are stopping them mid-sentence, we are going over their words, we're making them say things over? And I'm going to show you what that looks like from a task perspective in a little bit when I get through one of the power moves I'm going to share with you. But when we think about English and we think about the power of dialect and the power of how we can either build agency or we can continue to protect a system that is designed for the disenfranchisement of an entire group or entire groups of people, we have a decision to make. Which way will we go? Right? And so we talk about power here because if you're the person in the classroom and you have not done the work to tap into why you make those decisions that you make, you could be inadvertently disenfranchising someone. I was in Philadelphia a few years back and I found this sign, and I would show it to you, but it shows up backwards. The sign says, "I am silently correcting your grammar." When I first got it, I laughed wildly, but then I had to reflect and I kept it because this plaque really became a reminder of the actions I was taking to create a learning environment that was not agency developing at the time, but what became so. So I want to give us, every week, I give power moves. And so I want us to go through the power moves necessary for us to begin to look at our position, right? We do the POWER here. Look at our power from a positional perspective and look at ownership and the work so that we can create an environment that builds positive relationships. So, power move number one. Let's talk about this. The first thing I want you to do, I'm going to push and challenge you to do, is position language as an asset. What does it look like? Leaders they want to name language differences as rule governed and meaningful. Teams distinguish between language use and student understanding. They're not always the same thing. Assumptions about students' ability are surfaced and examined. That's the hardest one because it's going to require the adults to go back and tap into their own belief systems. What's the impact of this? Language stops being treated as a barrier and begins to be understood as a resource for learning. That maps onto cultural linguistic responsibility. Power move number two, expand who interprets data. Now, this time of year, it does get tougher because we're going into high stakes assessments, end of course, end of year, but figure out how to do it anyway, what it looks like. Students explain their thinking in their own language and words. Educators analyze both how students respond and what they understand. Ask one more question, ask another question, and then leaders ask how assessments feel to learners and they create connections. What's the impact of this? Data becomes more accurate because it reflects student thinking, not their language forms, right? And then power move number three, develop students' language flexibility for access. You want to broaden their linguistic dexterity, right? We want to make them flexible, right? Here, what does that mean? Explicit instruction in when and how to shift language based on context. If we were in person, I would say, raise your hand if you know a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old. They're masterful at this first bullet. They know when to change their language and they know with whom to change it. Opportunities for students to analyze language across settings, home, school, assessments, and then practice with multiple ways of expressing the same idea. What's the impact? Students gain the ability to navigate high stakes contexts without losing or shelving their identity. In school, too often, we expect students to shelve who they are. And we do it most often when it comes to their use of language. This is particularly a sensitive issue in middle schools where students are trying on language all the time. If you are an adult and you're in middle school and you think you're cool, by the time you catch up to the language, they've already moved on and you're no longer cool. Language shelving of identity is harmful of kids. Who you are comes through in your speech. Your language is your identity. And it's important that we offer students access and not shutting the door and not judgment. So I want to walk you through a mini lesson right now. So stick with me. This is a disenfranchising example. And this is a real thing that happened in a real school. And I outline this in my book. A student says a teacher was expecting students to check out books and put them back on the shelf in a particular way. This one young man put his book on the shelf, but he didn't follow the whole process. So the teacher addresses the student. And here's what he says. I've been put that book on the shelf. The teacher comes back with, say correctly. He comes back with, I've been put that book on the shelf. The teacher says, the correct way to say it is, I put the book on the shelf already. That's disenfranchising because she was correcting. She understood what that kid meant. There was no reason to go back in there and explain. But here's another way to think about this. Student speaker, I then put that book on the shelf. The teacher, I understand what you mean. If your idea was on an upcoming state test, how would it read? Student says, I put the book on the shelf already. That is an incredible difference. It honors the child's speaking. It acknowledges that there are two different ways to say the same thing, and it doesn't require the child to shelve their identity. And in fact, it increases their knowledge. It's this thing that we call contrastive analysis. This exercise right here opens the door for multiple ways of students learning language. So as we keep going into this assessment season, I want to challenge and charge you to go ahead and use more structures, explicitly teach, open more doors and more avenues for students. Remember this mini lesson and use it in your areas. Now, you know, we're coming up on the end. I got to give you my gem for the journey. Okay. Well, excited, excited, excited. We are doing our assessment readiness boot camp. What we're offering, 5 days free, 1 hour every day from Monday to Friday. I think last week I talked to you about my drive tool, our data responsible, our responsive, our instructionally aligned, valuable, and empowering tool. I put them out there in the atmosphere. I hope you've gotten a piece of it. Well, we're taking that whole drive thing, a whole drive concept, and we're putting it into a boot camp for you. And we're helping you get your assessment environment right. We know that you're going to count the right buckets. We know you're going to count the right scantrons and pencils and paper and calculator and test booklets. We want you to be as clear and fastidious about the assessment environment as you are about the booklets. So we have 5 days. It's all free. And we're offering a VIP implementation lab for those who really want to take what we learned during our time together to the next level and walk away with implementation, right? You're going to get tools. You're going to do that, what you need to do in the learning piece, but we want to offer you that coaching that's going to allow you to then move on and implement right away. So that is my gem for the journey for this week and for the next couple of weeks. Well, let's recap. Here we go. So here's what we talked about. Measurement carries power, right? For multilingual learners, the difference between measuring language and measuring learning matters. And remember what I said, we are all multilingual learners. Language is a system, not an error. Students bring rule-governed, meaningful language into the classroom. How we interpret it shapes what we believe about their ability and how your instructional power is used. Language shapes participation and interpretation. That is from Dr. Ball. And our second bullet here, language is a system, that is from Dr. Smitherman. And then language shapes participation and interpretation. Students don't just show up and show what they know. They show it through their language. And that language influences how their learning is understood. And then leaders shape how language is used. Leaders shape the conditions for use and interpretation. It's critical. We all have a part. Remember my sign? I silently correct your grammar. Well, we want to not do that anymore. Let's stay away from that. And so, want to then always, as always, I always invite you to make sure you've got a copy of my book. Get your book copy, scan the QR code right there. The link is here for you as well. And we also have pins. I decided to get some new pins. We are thrilled to have you get a copy of that book and join me on this power journey. And then, as always, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for spending the last few minutes with me talking about language, dialect, and assessment. Remember, the position matters, right? Your language is your identity. It is crucial that we offer students the ability to use their language to demonstrate their knowledge in ways that are meaningful. And in this time, during assessments that are getting really high stakes, we want to make sure students' language is not being seen as a barrier to academic success. So, thank you for joining me. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure that you hit the like and the share. Help us get to our goal. We need 10 more people. So, looking forward to having you be part of our team, join our power journey. Good night, everybody. I'll see you next week.